And welcome back to the AFL High Performance Podcast. My name is Jack McLean. Today will be a solo episode. I'm going to discuss everything that you need to know when it comes to ACL, anterior cruciate ligament injuries in the AFL, as well as touch on my rugby experience this year as well. Unfortunately, we had a ACL athlete and we returned them thankfully successfully to football this year. So I'll touch on those two experiences, share a general framework for the rehab practitioners as a bit of a guide, whether you're working at grassroots, development pathways, high school, you should be able to apply a lot of these tips and processes. I'll discuss some of the warning signs. So from a mitigation point of view, perhaps how you can audit your program if you've had a few over the last couple of years. I think typically in AFL, it's one a year, or it can be on two a year is sort of norm. So you're getting more than that, then you probably need to do a strong audit on your program and see if there's anything you can do to bring in some practices and methods that help mitigate these injuries, as they're high cost, of course, typically anywhere between 6 and 12 months out of the game. So we want to prevent them at all cost. And largely, I'll be talking about the rehabilitation process. So once an athlete is injured, where to take them, working back from their game performance. Provide top 3 tests that I think you want to tick off before the athlete plays their first game of football. How we balance performance prep with reducing the risk of further injury. Our most important gym and field-based training prescription, and understanding that this is a brain injury and it happens with, there's mechanics involved that put you at risk, but also it's a split-second injury. It tends to happen under rapid decision-making. So we know that decision-making is a factor in the moment, and you can put yourself in a vulnerable position through poor decision-making. So it is a brain injury, therefore we need to make sure we train the neuromuscular coordination aspect of the role and a lot of reactivity in their later stage of their performance. Program, some benchmarks, general benchmarks that you can look to achieve to ensure that the athlete is robust and physically in a better shape than they were previous to injury. And then the benefits of some of the research from Sophie Nymphus, the work from Bill Knowles, and of course Tim McGrath, who's doing great work in NFL at the moment, but also has his business Pitch Ready, which I've sent 3 athletes to pitch, and all thankfully have been successful in their returns and gained a lot of confidence out of his Pitch Ready assessment. But we'll start with the warning signs from a mitigation point of view. So understanding the history, which can be a sensitive one to get this information, but if their parents have had an ACL, obviously the challenging one with this is perhaps their parents never played competitive sport, so they were never in an environment that put them at risk. So they could have been vulnerable, but they just were never exposed to playing sport. So take that information with a grain of salt. But we do know there is a bit of strong research on if it's in the family, then you've got some hereditary risk of more risk, of gaining an ACL injury. That's not a controllable though. So what is? So we've got the mechanics. And there's great research on the width. So your how far you step when you go to decelerate, change of direction from your center of mass puts the more the knee's at extension, that puts more force through the knee joint, particularly the ACL. Whether our foot or hip is externally rotated and our knee is moving through valgus. So we've got our leg in a vulnerable position with the mechanics. So maybe the foot width isn't too wide from the hip, but the position the knee and the foot and the hip are in is putting the ACL ligament under strain. And then you've got the trunk as well. So as we go to step, is the trunk laterally flexing and putting more strain on the knee. So posture is really, really important with everything that we're doing from early stage rehab, but also for preventative reasons as well, making sure that all the performance prep exercises are done at a really high level. The gym is done at a really high level, and athletes, agility, sprinting, mechanics, acceleration, deceleration, are all done with efficiency in mind, I think puts you in a good place and builds good self-awareness. Ultimately, the game's done at a high pace and it's chaotic in nature. So you're going to, and all you need to do is film match play and you'll see, a number of situations where athletes could have easily done their ACL, but they didn't for whatever reason. So that's where I think Sophie Nymphus research is quite interesting in taking into account the amount of training load, particularly in small-sided games, and high deceleration loads, so match play, leading up to the incident. So there's some subjective research that athletes that once they've done an ACL, they reflect on their previous month to 2 month, and there's some commonalities around the increase of deceleration training load. So there's a thought process that perhaps you're doing some micro tears on that ACL, it's not fully recovering going into sessions, and therefore a position that you've done 1,000 times before, like a simple non-contact step that wouldn't cause you in the past when the athlete's in a good position, no issues, but that was the moment that perhaps broke the camel's back due to the build-up of work leading up to that moment. So that's where our non-invasive monitoring is really important. That's where our football program, working closely with the coaches to ensure that we're gradually building things in and we're managing our accel decel loads and exposures, and we're not doing similar themes of sessions back to back days, for example, or perhaps condensed schedules, 4-6 day breaks in a row. We're not exposing the athletes to high intensity accel decel type work early in the week, where we know that they're still recovering from the game up to 3-4 days post, where decision-making might not be as alert due to their fatigue, and therefore poorer decisions with high mechanical load potentially are putting the athletes at risk. So that's something to take into account. In terms of warning signs, we've also got obviously the demands at the position of how the athletes play the game. So from an AFL point of view, a lot of ACLs can happen from those aerial players that have an unbelievable ability to jump extremely high and land in awkward positions, like that trunk position that I talked about with an outstretched straight knee. So it doesn't matter how much robustness and training we're doing, there's some traumatic positions that athletes are going to get into that you could argue that you could never prevent, just simply being to the ability, their aerial ability to be able to jump really high, and then perhaps getting some perturbation and knock in the air and then landing really awkwardly. From an NRL perspective, those that carry the ball and love to step and are constantly just always stepping, and maybe they've got a favoured leg, so they're always stepping off that one leg, and that probably speaks to Sophia's sort of work around overload of that of those high force activities on that one particular leg, for example. So we want to make sure that we're understanding the positions the athletes play from a demand point of view. Are we taking those into account with our management, as well as our preparation? How can we develop athletes and expose them to maybe the aerial positions where they are practicing landing in as best positions you possibly can, and learning how to roll, for example, to help try and reduce the risk of poor landing mechanics from those aerial jumps. And then same with the stepping, can we work on some of those mechanics around how wide we're stepping from our center of mass, perhaps, or just the trunk position, making sure that we've got good co-construction through their trunk. And that's where the use of aqua bags can be quite good, bands, and feedback filming and showing athletes feedback both live in training as well as in agility drills around what their posture is doing in certain change direction deceleration tasks. So constantly working on the efficiency, constantly trying to prepare athletes for their demands of their position, so you're giving themselves the best chance to help reduce these situations on game day and in training, but also understanding that sometimes the athlete's just going to get into a vulnerable position and ultimately something's going to go, particularly in those contact-related ones where perhaps we couldn't prevent. Top 3 tests to know an athlete is ready. So you've gone through the whole process of return to play markers, return to agility markers, return to sprinting markers, return to train markers. Now they're out ready to go, and the athlete's probably banging on the door and they're feeling ready. So that would be phase 1, the athlete's confidence to play. They've put their hand up, they feel ready to play. So that's a big factor, I think, because they've typically got great intuition, particularly the more experienced athletes, and they know when they're deep down whether they've done the work and they feel prepared. So that would be one, but we don't want to just rely on the athlete, of course. Then we've got our pitch ready assessment, which is probably good to do a couple of months, like when they're getting close to ready for full training. So they're able to do the triple hop tests, single leg drop jumps, they're able to do a reactive cut at, quite a high speed, around that 7-8 meters per second. So they're competent to be able to do all those and attack those tests maximally, all their strength markers, but they're perhaps not fully training yet. So you have time, depending on what feedback you're going to get. In my experience with all three, there was work on with all of them because we did it early enough. So the athlete's competent, they can do all the tests, they're familiar with the test to some degree, but you're going to get some good quality objective feedback. So then you can, and you have time to apply that feedback in the next block of training. So you can get after that, hopefully one, maybe two areas that need some work and before the athlete plays. So pitch ready assessment. I think it's also good to have an external person. It gives the athlete a lot of confidence, someone outside of the club that has no bias towards the decision making. So it's good for both the athlete as well as the medical performance team to gain some confidence and some clarity on what we need to work on going forward. And then a non-negotiable is a month, so 4 weeks of full training with match load at the end of every week before their first game. So that gives us both the chronic load is now quite stable. So that exponential chronic load is in a healthy spot. So they're used to the strength and power program. They're used to the training. Everything's routine. They've done 4 match load sessions and now they're ready to roll into a game load. So now, not only are they going to try that first game, but they're going to be competent being able to back it up week after week. So that's non-negotiable. So they're probably the 3 main ones I'd like to tick off, all 3 of those before they play. Balancing performance with the reducing risk. So this is where you work closely with the medical team and their clinical assessments and their expert opinion on whether we're going, are we slow enough to allow for healing? Are we going, and equally, are we getting enough hard training in to develop robustness and being able to tick off the criteria that we need to tick off. So that balancing is all the way through from day one through to probably after they've played their first few games, constantly working with the medical team and the athlete. Most important training methods, touched on this before. So early on, typically there's not going to be a lot of reactivity as we're just building their range of motion back to make sure they've got full knee bend and they're strong in full range of motion through the knee, like a single leg squat, for example. And also they're able to generate a high amount of force through like a single leg squat, for example, or the single leg back squat isometric. So looking at their force capabilities through isolated knee movements as well as their range of motion through range strength. And then once we're starting to get to that point where now we're doing reactivity work, plyometrics, that's where we want to challenge their brain as much as possible, making quick decisions under pressure with as much chaos as we can. So simulating the game. And that's where we want to work with the coaches and consult the coaches and bring the coaches along to engage and develop drills where possible. So that's happening all the way through from when the athlete starts doing ball work. Even when they return to play, we still want to add in some extra, if they're an aerial athlete, make sure they're getting in some bag work and they're practicing, contested marking, jumping and launching at the ball and landing in different awkward positions and filming it and giving feedback to the athlete on their landing positions. Same with their ball carrier or like they use their step, same sort of thing. Come up with some small-sided games, some drills that are specific to their position. So, for example, if they're a winger and they're working on the edge, simulate those positions, add as much chaos and decision-making as possible and constantly challenge the athlete. We want to make mistakes in this environment. We want the athlete really challenged, both with fatigue in the system, being fresh and at full speed, all different types of scenarios. So they're not at risk of the first 10 minutes of the game when they're fresh and they've got full intensity, and they're not at risk of poor mechanics and poor decision-making under fatigue. Benchmarks, I'll just quickly share my screen. So if you're watching this or if you're just listening into the podcast, make sure to tune in on YouTube. I'll share a couple of examples of some programs, so some takeaways for you guys. I've deliberately taken off, obviously, names from the athletes. So I think typically you want to have like an overview of each phase of, from surgery through to, hopefully you can see that okay. So pain-free normal active day of living. So we're going from that phase, that clinical phase, all the way through to strength markers, a leg press, typically 1.5 times body weight, 5 reps, hitting all your hamstring markers before sprinting, hitting all your hip profile markers before layering in change direction and agility progressions. Then we've got our rate of force development, like drop jumps, counter move jumps, single drop jumps, getting them back to baseline and hopefully make some PBs, particularly in the reactivity side of things. And then lastly, in our final phase, we're keeping some form of monitoring in place. So, like, for example, with this athlete, we used a single leg drop jump at the start of the week to see how they tolerate the match load session and see if there's any trends in there, in both fatigue, but also loss of strength, and whether we need to intervene and keep their reactivity in there, because that was a big part of the way they moved through the field. They were quite an explosive athlete, powerful athlete. So that was our marker, but you could come up with anything that you have access to that you think will meet the athlete in the way they play and the demands of the game. And then, like as I talked about, we did that pitch ready assessment, and then their last marker was the 4 weeks of unrestricted training. So they can't miss training sessions. They can't miss the match load session. It needs to be uninterrupted. Otherwise, that week starts again. So that's our insurance policy that they're ready to go. Final marker. Some more detail around some progressions. So like that control to chaos, which is quite commonly referred to. So here we're doing some level 1 agility through to level 4. So we're starting to work from controlled positions where they're actually thinking about the task and thinking about the mechanics, getting video feedback. So it's probably more like a brain down type tasks. And then as we're getting closer to this stage, it's more that reactivity. So it's the feed forward, where the athlete is reacting to the stimulus and reacting to the environment. So there's lots of chaos in these later stages, and the body is making decisions on the fly. So it's not a conscious sort of thought. Now you're not giving them sort of feedback around their thinking about where their foot position is, for example. It's more external sort of cues and then just using the vision for them to just see the feedback and making their own critiques around the positions they might hit. And that's where GoPro was quite helpful in this scenario, where we do a lot of activity, and I might be the one in the drill as well with the athlete and just filming how they're moving, using that as a bit of a way of having some objectivity around how they're moving in high chaotic environments, and whether we feel that the strength phases and all the drilling and plyometric work and technical development work, where we're building that awareness around their trunk position, their foot position, seeing how that transferred into hard chaotic environments, and almost creating like that pitch ready assessment, but doing that on a weekly basis rather than just being a controlled straight line cut. It was in lots of different types of environments specific to this player's position, and using that with the medical team to decide whether the athlete was ready to start that 4-week training block. You have your GPS planned and then what actually happened. So just looking at how we're tracking each week, looking at the calendar of the sessions that were done each week. That would be something we'd monitor their loads and also session plans. So that would be important. Also good to have a distraction. So in this case, the athlete identified they want to work on a bench press program. So that was the 7-week bench press program that our head of strength and power took the athlete through, and that was a really good distraction in the middle stage of the rehab. It's obviously a long year. So they hit a PB and pretty good effort at the age of 32, 33 to hit that PB. So that was a healthy distraction, but also something that the athlete identified they wanted to work on. So I think that's quite good. These are the sort of performance prep exercises that we did pre-field, and then some recon skills that we developed over their 2-week break, doing their own. And then while they're not running, this was the pre-field We use a 20-minute watt bike assessment to then prescribe 2 to 3 session a week watt bike session, as well as some swimming sessions as well. So they're off-fit conditioning for their physiology to make sure that they're ready to go and they handle the running loads better when they do start their running. So that's the AFL perspective. NRL, pretty similar program. This is how we display it to the athletes. They have their different phases, the recovery, the strength. I wasn't actually involved in those two because the injury occurred when I wasn't at the club. I started in the later stage around the sort of this phase 3 to 4 and took them through to their return to performance markers. So similar sort of process, hit all the strength markers before they're running, then spend a good 2 to 4 weeks of prep to run phase, working on ticking off that drop jump, counter movement, and triple hop. So before they run, because as we know, running can have a bit of fatigue. So we want to use that dynamic tickets with the plyometrics, particularly with this athlete who was very powerful. We knew that we had enough time to get them running fit at later stages. So we prioritize a heavy plyometric dynamic drilling aspect to their program early on to tick off all their jump tests before they ran. And that, I feel, put them in really good stead for the later stages where we're able to maintain their strength and power and dynamic qualities while reconditioning their running loads and football loads. Same sort of thing planned for that 4 weeks unrestricted training. Same thing, had the performance prep exercises that they did that were theme-based, agility, acceleration, so they would complete this. This is depending on each block, specific to the athlete and their training day focus. And equally creating a calendar that worked them up and prepared them for their game day. So having some form of idea of what we did in each phase, I think is important. This is almost like a journal for the coaches and medical team to look at what are the loads that have been done and what was the session content. So with the running, for example, they did 3 sets of 440 meters, 7 seconds on the 20, every 20 seconds, then some 50s, then some 60s. And this was the prep for agility, wall isometrics and drilling the athlete was doing on that given day. And then any markers as well that the athlete might have did. So particularly a NOR board here in red would indicate they didn't tick it off. So it gives us good history to see what day of the injury the athlete had ticked off certain markers. So we've got that for our own records to be able to see if there's any trends on when particular athletes would tick off certain markers, but also we can guide us on having that earn the right on how fast we can accelerate the athlete depending on how they're tracking with their markers and strength qualities. Gymnastics is probably something I didn't touch on. So we did a lot of gymnastics with both the AFL and NRL athlete. Great way to develop confidence, both from an aerial point of view, but also develop high volume of plyometric tasks in the gymnastics. Good also to get out of the club and mix it up in a different environment, as well as using the different flooring, sprung floor, trampoline to be able to challenge the athlete in different ways. So I think the gymnastics is a really good spot before probably that phase for about 6 weeks to 8 weeks, a couple of times a week before the athlete's full training. So it gives them a lot of confidence that they're ready for football training with the main group. So hopefully that gives you a snapshot on some general markers there. Starting to wrap up the show, so I think highly recommend checking out Sophie Nymphus's research on decision-making and deceleration around the mechanical loading. Bill Knowles, obviously from neuromuscular coordination point of view, a lot of drills that I've borrowed over the years that I've applied. And I think and he's an expert in that neuromuscular coordination development as well, so getting multiple sessions in the day. So how to set up the athlete's day around a main group schedule. So you might have an AM session, then it could be a middle of the day session, which is typically the field, and then an afternoon session. And you might get 2 hits, an AM and a PM, of some coordination-based work, depending on what you're chasing and what you're trying to get after. So I think that's great methods to borrow and apply to your training. And then obviously Tim McGrath, so we can have that objective approach, get confidence from both for the athlete, but as well medical performance on when the athlete's ready to return to performance. Is the athlete just surviving or are they thriving, which is something that Tim often would refer to, and we can use the data to help us inform whether they're thriving or surviving or not. Hopefully this helped out the practitioners out there, as well as any athletes. If you're going through ACL and you've just got maybe a physio, not a strength and conditioning coach, and you're ready for that reintegration to running and dynamic loading, plyometrics, multi-directional work, make sure to reach out to you can email me at jack@propellerpro.com or book in a call, and I can discuss what that looks like with working with one of our AFL strength and conditioning coaches. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you guys on the next episode.